From the very first spotlight, Barbra Streisand's love life played like a sweeping ballad, gorgeous, chaotic, and unforgettable. Just like her voice, many men came and went, some as loud as storms, others lingering only as rumors. But a few remained etched like glittering scars, so that at 83, Barbra still calls them impossible to forget. The first name is Elliott Gould, her first love, her first husband, and the doorway to both Broadway's glory and the hard education of the heart. It began in 1961, inside the audition room for I Can Get It For You Wholesale. Gould already had the lead. Barbra, new and nervy, was just another hopeful. He later recalled that after her tryout, she was so flustered, she scribbled her phone number and handed it to nearly everyone. But the one who actually called was Elliott Gould. That call changed 2 lives. Barbra didn't just land the role, she found the man who would become her husband. They married in 1963, welcomed a son, and for a brief span embodied the golden ideal of young love. But Hollywood seldom plays nice. What began as chocolate sweet turned, in Gould's words, into a bath of lava, sweet and scalding at once. Barbra would later admit, when 2 people are consumed by their own ambitions, marriage becomes a dangerous balancing act. The imbalance widened as her career rocketed. That same year, she released the Barbra Streisand album, winning 2 Grammys. By 1964, she owned Broadway as Fanny Brice in Funny Girl, then landed on Time's cover. In 1968, she vaulted to film with Funny Girl and carried home an Academy Award. She became a cultural shockwave. Meanwhile, Gould worked steadily but couldn't match the velocity of a shooting star. The press pinned him with Mr. Streisand, a shadow he despised. Eventually, Barbra became more important than us, he confessed. By the early 70s, the cracks split open. Gould's off-screen turbulence made headlines. A glimpse of Tiger shut down after just a few days. And studios demanded psychiatric evaluations before hiring him. He denied drug abuse. I didn't have a drug problem. I had a problem with reality, but the damage was done. At the same time, tabloids fed rumors that Barbra shared brief sparks with Sidney Chaplin and Omar Sharif. They separated in 1969 and finalized their divorce in 1971. Still, the story didn't end. Gould rebounded with an Oscar nomination for Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, then glowed in Mass Times H. The Long Goodbye, California Split, and, years later, the Ocean's 11 franchise, Streisand soared to legend, dated a constellation of famous men, and ultimately found lasting harbor with James Brolin in 1998. Despite the split, Barbra and Elliott never cut each other out. They co-parented Jason with care. Resentment softened into respect. Barbra has said, "Once you love someone, they become part of who you are." Gould echoed it. He would always love her and consider her part of his small family, grateful, too, that James Brolin treats him kindly. No fairy tale ending, but something rarer. A post-divorce bond built on shared history, maturity, and a warmth that no longer burns, yet never goes cold. For Barbra, Elliott Gould is more than an ex. He's the man who knew her before the world did. The first love who taught her how to love and how to let go beneath the paparazzi storm, which is why, on the list of men she could never forget, the first name is Elliott Gould. If Elliott Gould was the tender first love, Then, John Peters was the wildfire dragging Barbra Streisand out of her safety zone and hurling her into a world of passion, chaos, creativity, and destruction. A superstar at the height of fame and a hot-tempered hairdresser with dreams bigger than the heads he styled on paper, they made no sense. Yet fate, with a mischievous grin, brought them together. And what began with a haircut became a saga no one could have scripted. In the early 1970s, Peters was a hairdresser known in Hollywood for his fiery temper and restless ambition. He often boasted he'd cut Streisand's hair for free. Anywhere. Anytime. That word free, Streisand later joked, was exactly how to win her attention. Opportunity knocked when she needed a fresh style for Pete's Sake in 1974. At a party, she noticed a woman's perfect cut and asked who styled it. The answer, John Peters. One call, one appointment, and destiny began to stir. Barbra showed up an hour late. Peters nearly stormed out, but when she walked in, everything shifted. He admitted he was floored by her presence. She, in turn, found his blunt fire strangely magnetic. Soon they were inseparable, both in love and in work. Peters moved from hairstyling into management, then producing. Streisand, instead of keeping him at arm's length, gave him her trust, and together they built projects that reshaped Hollywood. Their crown jewel was A Star is Born, 1976. Barbra starred. Peters produced. The film exploded into a cultural phenomenon, but alongside triumph came turbulence. Their love burned too fiercely. Peters even wove his obsession into the script, like the famous line about Streisand's cute little round butt, lifted directly from his own infatuation. Away from the limelight, their life was surprisingly modest. Barbara Walters once visited their ranch home and marveled at its simplicity, but domestic peace couldn't mask the storms. They built 5 houses on that same ranch, each refusing to compromise, each wanting their own vision. Love bound them. Pride divided them. The turning point came with Yentl. Streisand threw her soul into the project. Peters doubted, until she staged a full costume performance in their home to win him over. He relented. But the gap between them widened. She became consumed by art. He felt sidelined. After 8 years, they admitted it, too much dependency, too much fire. They walked away not with hatred, but with recognition. Unlike with Gould, the ending here wasn't bitter. They became friends. Peters repeatedly declared that Streisand changed him, taught him about real women, equality, and power. Even in 2017, he called her probably the love of my life. They didn't make it 40 years. But they forged something rare, a bond that outlived romance. For Barbra, John Peters was the storm destructive, dazzling, unforgettable, a storm she never regretted letting into her life. If John Peters was the storm, then Don Johnson was the breeze, a fleeting gust of warmth and joy that brushed through Barbra Streisand's life. Short but unforgettable. Christmas in Aspen. Late 1980s. Amid the snowy glow and glittering lights, Barbra met Don Johnson, the star of Miami Vice. Lean, bronzed, flashing that famous grin, he made the first move, and though Barbra had seen it all, she was disarmed by his youthful confidence. Their fling sent tabloids into overdrive. Barbra later confessed, "He was like a living piece of art. I just wanted to collect him." With Don, life was lighthearted. They went to see Mike Tyson fight, flew in helicopters, sped on boats, boyish adventures she never would have chosen alone. But with him, she felt freer, younger, unburdened by fame's weight. In the beginning, there was laughter. But soon, cracks appeared. Barbra craved attention and honesty. Don grew distracted, lost in filming schedules and endless calls. When she played him the demo of their duet Till I Loved You, he brushed it off. To Barbra, it was a love song. To Don, it was exposure, her legendary voice overshadowing his own. The final blow came with a phone call answered not by Don, but by his ex-wife, Melanie Griffith. Barbra didn't resent him supporting a troubled past love, but she couldn't forgive the secrecy. For her, a man without transparency had no place in her heart. They parted without drama. Only clarity. Barbra admitted later it was pure fun, not meant to last. But it made me happy for a while. Decades later, when they run into each other, Don still pulls her into a hug and whispers, "I love you." Barbra doesn't reply, but her eyes soften, because even brief sunshine can linger in memory, enough to warm the darkest storms. January 1969. London sparkled with the royal premiere of Funny Girl. Among the royalty and celebrities, Barbra Streisand, Brooklyn's own ugly duckling turned swan, was seated next to the most eligible bachelor in politics, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Canada's new Prime Minister, charismatic, witty, and unpredictable. He was already a sensation. The press called Trudeomania. Barbra had seen his photo in Life magazine and joked with her friend, "Now that's the kind of man I'd like to meet." Fade bleu. That evening, at Claridge's, Trudeau asked her to dance. She coyly refused, claiming she disliked public dancing, and nudged him toward her friend instead. The next morning, tabloids erupted with rumors of Trudeau's new flame. Only Barbra and Pierre knew the truth. A spark had ignited across that table. Soon after, Trudeau phoned Streisand, wrapped in a bathrobe, towel on her head. She laughed when her maid announced, "The Prime Minister of Canada is on the line." Barbra quipped afterward, "Just call me Madam Prime Minister." A joke? Yes, but one that hinted at the tantalizing possibility. Their romance played out like a movie. Trudeau slipped down to New York for weekends, with her dining at Casa Brazil, hitting discos, disappearing into her apartment. When asked by reporters, he teased, "Not long enough? In Ottawa." She turned heads at Parliament in a paisley suit trimmed with sable. Even hardened politicians noticed the Prime Minister gazing at her like a schoolboy in love. Barbra admitted she imagined life as Canada's First Lady learning French, making movies only in Canada, supporting her husband's causes. But reality intruded. His Catholic faith, her son Jason, and her blazing Hollywood career all stood in the way. Neither could abandon their world for the other. They parted tenderly, not bitterly. Trudeau later married Margaret Sinclair. Barbra moved on to Ryan O'Neill and others. Yet their affection lingered. She sent warm notes after his family tragedies. And when he died in 2000, she wrote, "He was elegant, private, dignified, the perfect union of mind and body." At a 2012 concert in Ottawa, Barbra joked, "Justin Trudeau reminds me of a nice Jewish boy from Brooklyn. He just went into his father's business." The audience roared. But beneath the laughter lay the memory of an almost love, a cinematic. What if that never quite became history? Hollywood has always known May-December romances, but usually it's older men chasing youth. Barbra Streisand turned that cliché upside down. In the 1990s, already in her 50s, she shocked the world by stepping out with tennis's golden boy Andre Agassi. 28 years, her junior, the headlines were explosive. Cameras followed her every time she appeared courtside, cheering for him in high-stakes matches. And Agassi, in front of roaring crowds, often lifted his hand toward her in a quiet, intimate signal to the press. He played coy. She's a very good friend, a very special friend, but everyone could read between the lines. Years later, in his autobiography, Agassi confessed the truth. Barbra fascinated him completely. Not just the legend, not just the voice, but the woman. He wrote, "Dating Barbra Streisand is like wearing hot lava. She was fire, dangerous, irresistible, and unforgettable. There was no calculation, no pretense." Barbra basked in the joy, smiling wide at every dinner, every shared laugh. Agassi discovered in her a depth, confidence, and sensuality far beyond anything he had known with women his age. Together, they braved the whispers, the jokes, the endless fixation on their age gap. Barbra didn't flinch. She walked proudly at his side, as if to declare love is ageless. Like a summer storm, the passion burned bright, but didn't last. Agassi returned to his whirlwind career and later found lasting love with Steffi Graf. Barbra moved forward too, ultimately building a rare Hollywood marriage with James Brolin. Yet the memory of Agassi remains brief, incandescent, impossible to erase. Barbra never regretted it. To her, Andre proved that the heart doesn't keep time. And for Agassi, Barbra Streisand will forever be the volcano equal parts trembling, danger, and desire. If Elliott Gould was the first love, John Peters, the wildfire, Pierre Trudeau, the unfinished dream, and Andre Agassi, the blazing lava, then James Brolin was the safe harbor, the love strong enough to last forever. In 1996, at what seemed like an ordinary dinner party, Barbra walked into a blind date. She expected nothing. By then, she was content with her son, her music, and her Malibu home overlooking the ocean. But when she entered the room, she saw a tall man, hair freshly shorn, and teased you, messed up your hair. That playful jab lit the spark. James Brolin later admitted he fell in love that very night. Love came late, but it came steady. James wasn't dazzled by Barbra's stardom. Instead, he grounded her, protected her, and let her be herself. When she released The Mirror Has Two Faces, a film she directed and starred in, James stood proudly in the background, watching as if her triumph was his own. When she received the AFI Lifetime Achievement Award in 2001, he sat quietly at her side, his eyes full of pride. They married in 1998, surrounded by Hollywood royalty, yet behind the flashbulbs, it was intimate Barbra in her white gown, walking down the aisle with her son Jason, while James waited with a smile. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a declaration that after storms and heartbreaks, both had found peace in each other. In her memoir, Barbra confessed I had given up on finding someone. I thought I was fine alone. But then James came along safe, kind, funny, capable. Maybe you have to be happy with yourself first before you can be happy with someone else. James wasn't just a husband. He was her anchor, her partner, her mirror. He loved her not as Barbra Streisand, the icon, but as the woman who laughed at her own jokes, who teased him about his hair, and who finally let herself be vulnerable. After more than 2 decades together, they remain inseparable. And now, at 83, Barbra still calls James Brolin the man I was waiting for my whole life. Barbra Streisand's love life was never a smooth ballad. It was a symphony, sometimes tender, sometimes stormy, sometimes whispering like a secret. The 6 men who walked through her life didn't just share moments with her. They left imprints that shaped the woman and the legend she became. Elliott Gould, the first husband, the young love who stood by her when she was unknown. With him, Barbra learned what pure love felt like and how ambition can crack even the strongest foundation. John Peters, the wild card, a hairdresser turned producer who set her world on fire. He brought chaos, obsession, and creativity, proving that love can be both intoxicating and destructive. Don Johnson, the Hollywood charmer, a fleeting romance filled with laughter, spontaneity, and a song that became their rise and fall. He reminded her that sometimes love is meant to be light, not lasting. Pierre Trudeau, the dashing Canadian Prime Minister who made her imagine a different destiny as a First Lady. Their romance was passionate yet impossible. A bittersweet. What if that lingered? Andre Agassi, the fiery young tennis star, 28 years her junior. Their affair defied expectations, mocked by tabloids but cherished by her as proof that desire knows no age. And finally, James Brolin, the forever love, not a blaze, but a hearth, not chaos, but peace. With him, Barbra found safety, partnership, and the rare gift of a love meant to last a lifetime. At 83, Barbra doesn't erase any of them. Each joy, each wound, each fleeting flame added depth to her artistry and gave her voice its raw power. These 6 men were not just lovers or partners. They were chapters of a story that turned into the longest song of her life, the song of Barbra Streisand herself. At 83, Barbra Streisand no longer needs to prove herself in front of a camera. Nor does she crave the blinding spotlights of a stage. She sits quietly in her Malibu garden, waves crashing like echoes of memory. 6 men lovers, partners, fleeting flames remain only as reflections in the twilight sea. She does not regret. Every laugh, every tear has become a note in the longest ballad of her life. She once said, "Without them, I would not be who I am today. Without heartbreak, there would be no trembling melodies from my heart. Without loneliness, I would never have learned how to sing of love, forgiveness, and hope." Barbra ends the story of the men she could never forget with an unexpected piece. Because she knows love never disappears, it simply changes form. Into a song, a memory, or a sigh. And her truest, eternal romance has always been with her audience, the ones who have listened, cried, and celebrated with her for more than half a century. As night falls, Barbra hums a few quiet notes, not for the men who once left, but for herself. And for those who remain, a final song, tender yet proud, the anthem of survival, of longing, of a heart still capable of trembling after every storm. If Barbra Streisand's story touched your heart, don't forget to show your love for this channel. Hit like, subscribe, and stay with us as we uncover more hidden chapters behind the glittering lights of fame. And if you'd like to help us bring even more cinematic and deeply human stories to life, please tap the super thanks button. It's like sending a warm embrace from your heart to ours. Every gesture of support is not just encouragement, it's proof that the echoes of love, loss, and hope will continue to resonate, never fading away.